Hello, and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of The City and the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke. Chapter 14. Our hero Alvin is returning from the lost fortress of Shalmoraine with a new companion, a silent flying robot. The journey back to Airlie lasted almost 3 days, partly because Alvin, for his own reasons, was in no hurry to return. The physical exploration of Lys had now taken second place to a more important and exciting project. He was slowly making contact with a strange, obsessed intelligence which had now become his companion. He suspected that the robot was trying to use him for its own purposes, which would be no more than poetic justice. What its motives were, he could never be quite certain, since it still stubbornly refused to speak to him. For some reason of his own, perhaps fear that it might reveal too many of his secrets, the master must have placed very efficient blocks upon its speech circuits, and Alvin's attempts to clear them were completely unsuccessful. Even indirect questioning of the "if you say nothing, I shall assume you mean yes" type failed. The robot was much too intelligent to be taken in by such simple tricks. In other respects, however, it was more cooperative. It would obey orders which did not require it to speak or reveal information. After a while, Alvin found that he could control it, as he could direct the robots in Diaspar by thought alone. This was a great step forward, and a little later the creature, it was hard to think of it as a mere machine, relaxed its guard still further and allowed him to see through its eyes. It did not object, it seemed, to such passive forms of communication, but it blocked all attempts at closer intimacy. Hilvar's existence it ignored completely. It would obey none of his commands, and its mind was closed to all his probing. At first, this was something of a disappointment to Alvin, who had hoped that Hilvar's greater mental powers would enable him to force open this treasure chest of hidden memories. It was not until later that he realized the advantage of possessing a servant who would obey no one else in all the world. The member of the expedition who strongly objected to the robot was Criff. Perhaps he imagined that he now had a rival, or perhaps he disapproved on general principles of anything that flew without wings. When no one was looking, he made several direct assaults on the robot, which had infuriated him still further by taking not the slightest notice of his attacks. Eventually, Hilvar had been able to calm him down, and on the homeward journey in the ground car he seemed to have resigned himself to the situation. Robot and insect escorted the vehicle as it glided silently through forest and field, each keeping to the side of its respective master and pretending its rival was not there. Seranus was already waiting for them as the car floated into Airlie. It was impossible, Alvin thought, to surprise these people. Their interlinked minds kept them in touch with everything that was happening in their land. He wondered how they had reacted to his adventures in Shalmoraine, which presumably everyone in Lys now knew about. Seranus seemed to be worried, and more uncertain than he had ever seen her before, and Alvin remembered the choice that now lay before him. In the excitement of the last few days he had almost forgotten it. He did not like to spend energy worrying about problems that still lay in the future, but the future was now upon him, and he must decide in which of these two worlds he wished to live. The voice of Seranus was troubled when she began to speak, and Alvin had the sudden impression that something had gone awry with the plans that Lys had been making for him. What had been happening during his absence? Had emissaries gone into Diaspar to tamper with Kedron's mind, and had they failed in their duty? "Alvin," began Seranus, "there are many things I did not tell you before, but which you must now learn if you are to understand our actions. You know one of the reasons for the isolation of our two races. The fear of the invaders, that dark shadow in the depths of every human mind, turned your people against the world and made them lose themselves in their own dreams. Here in Lys, that fear has never been so great, though we bore the burden of the final attack. We had a better reason for our actions, and what we did with our eyes open. Long ago, Alvin, men sought immortality and at last achieved it. They forgot that a world which had banished death must also banish birth. The power to extend life indefinitely might bring contentment to the individual, but it brought stagnation to the race. Ages ago we sacrificed our immortality, but Diaspar still follows the false dream. That is why our ways parted, and why they must never meet again. Although the words had been more than half expected, the blow seemed none the less for its anticipation. Yet Alvin refused to admit the failure of all his plans, half-formed though they were, and only part of his brain was listening to Seranus now. He understood and noted all her words, but the conscious portion of his mind was retracing the road to Diaspar, trying to imagine every obstacle that could be placed in his way. Seranus was clearly unhappy. Her voice was almost pleading as it spoke, and Alvin knew that she was talking not only to him, but to her son. She must be aware of the understanding and affection that had grown up between them during the days they had spent together. Hilvar was watching his mother intently as she spoke, and it seemed to Alvin that his gaze held not merely concern, but also more than a trace of censure. We do not wish to make you do anything against your will, but you must surely realize what it would mean if our people met again. Between our culture and yours is a gulf as great as any that ever separated Earth from its ancient colonies. Think of this one fact, Alvin. You and Hilvar are now nearly the same age, but both he and I will have been dead for centuries when you are still a youth. And this is only your first in an infinite series of lives. The room was very quiet, so quiet that Alvin could hear the strange, plaintive cries of an unknown beast in the fields beyond the village. Presently he said, almost in a whisper, "What do you want me to do?" We hoped that we could give you the choice of staying here or returning to Diaspar, but now that is impossible. Too much has happened for us to leave the decision in your hands. Even in the short time you have been here, your influence has been highly disturbing. No, I'm not reproving you. I'm sure you intended no harm, but it would have been best to leave the creatures you met in Shalmarain to their own destiny. And as for Diaspar, Seranus gave a gesture of annoyance. Too many people know where you have gone. We did not act in time. What is most serious, the man who helped you discover Lys has vanished. Neither your council nor our agents can discover him, so he remains a potential danger to our security. Perhaps you are surprised that I am telling you all this, but it is quite safe for me to do so. I am afraid we have only one choice before us. We must send you back to Diaspar with a false set of memories. Those memories have been constructed with great care, and when you return home, you will know nothing of us. You will believe that you have had rather dull and dangerous adventures in gloomy underground caverns where the roofs continually collapsed behind you, and you kept alive only through eating unappetizing weeds and drinking from occasional springs. For the rest of your life, you will believe this is the truth, and everyone in Diaspar will accept your story. There will be no mystery then to lure any further explorers. They will think they know all there is to be known about Lys. Seranus paused and looked at Alvin with anxious eyes. We are very sorry that this is necessary, and ask your forgiveness while you still remember us. You may not accept our verdict, but we know many facts that are hidden from you. At least you will have no regrets, for you will believe you have discovered all that there is to be found. Alvin wondered if that was true. He was not sure that he would ever settle down to the routine life in Diaspar, even when he had convinced himself that nothing worthwhile existed beyond its walls. What was more, he had no intention of putting the matter to the test. When do you wish me to undergo this treatment? Alvin asked. Immediately. We are ready now. Open your mind to me as you did before, and you will know nothing until you find yourself back in Diaspar. Alvin was silent for a while. Then he said quietly, I would like to say goodbye to Hilvar. Seranus nodded. I understand. I will leave you here for a while and return when you are ready. She walked over to the stairs that led down to the interior of the house and left them alone on the roof. It was some time before Alvin spoke to his friend. He felt a great sadness, yet also an unbroken determination not to permit the wreck of all his hopes. He looked once more down upon the village where he had found a measure of happiness, and which he might never see again if those who were ranged behind Seranus had their way. The ground car was still standing beneath one of the wide-branching trees with the patient robot hanging in the air above it. A few children had gathered around to examine this strange newcomer, but none of the adults seemed in the least interested. "Hilvar," said Alvin abruptly, "I'm very sorry about this." "So am I," Hilvar answered, his voice unstable with emotion. "I'd hoped that you would have remained here." "Do you think that what Seranus wants to do is right?" "Do not blame my mother. She is only doing as she is asked," replied Hilvar. Though he had not answered his question, Alvin had not the heart to ask it again. It was unfair to put such a strain on his friend's loyalty. "Then tell me," asked Alvin, "how could your people stop me if I tried to leave with my memories untouched?" "It would be easy. If you tried to escape, we would take control of your mind and force you to come back." Alvin had expected as much and was discouraged. He wished that he could confide in Hilvar, who was obviously upset by their impending separation, but he dared not risk the failure of his plans. Very carefully, checking every detail, he traced out the only road that could lead him back to Diaspar on the terms he wished. There was one risk which he had to face and against which he could do nothing to protect himself. If Seranus broke her promise and dipped into his mind, all his careful preparations might be in vain. He held out his hand to Hilvar, who grasped it firmly but seemed unable to speak. "Let's go downstairs to meet Seranus," said Alvin. "I'd like to see some of the people in the village before I go." Hilvar followed him silently into the peaceful coolness of the house, then out through the hallway and on to the ring of colored grass that surrounded the building. Seranus was waiting for him there, looking calm and resolute. She knew that Alvin was trying to hide something from her and thought again of the precautions she had taken. As a man may flex his muscles before some great effort, she ran through the compulsion patterns she might have to use. "Are you ready, Alvin?" she asked. "Quite ready," replied Alvin, and there was a tone in his voice that made her look at him sharply. "Then it will be best if you make your mind a blank, as you did before. You will feel and know nothing after that until you find yourself back in Diaspar." Alvin turned to Hilvar and said in a quick whisper that Seranus could not hear, "Goodbye, Hilvar. Don't worry. I'll be back." Then he faced Seranus again. "I don't resent what you are trying to do," he said. "No doubt you believe it is for the best, but I think you are wrong. Diaspar and Lys should not remain apart forever. One day they may need each other desperately. So I'm going home with all that I have learned, and I do not think you can stop me." He waited no longer, and it was just as well. Seranus never moved, but instantly he felt his body slipping from his control. The power that had brushed aside his own will was even greater than he had expected, and he realized that many hidden minds must be aiding Seranus. Helplessly, he began to walk back into the house, and for an awful moment he thought his plan had failed. Then there came a flash of steel and crystal, and the metal arms closed swiftly around him. His body fought against them, as he had known it must do, but his struggles were useless. The ground fell away beneath him, and he caught a glimpse of Hilvar, frozen by surprise, with a foolish smile upon his face. The robot was carrying him a dozen feet above the ground, much faster than a man could run. It took Seranus only a moment to understand his ruse, and his struggles died away as she relaxed her control. But she was not defeated yet, and presently there happened that which Alvin had feared and done his best to counteract. There were now two separate entities fighting inside his mind, and one of them was pleading with the robot, begging it to set him down. The real Alvin waited breathlessly, resisting only a little against forces he knew he could not hope to fight. He had gambled. There was no way of telling beforehand if his uncertain ally would obey orders as complex as those he had given it. Under no circumstances, he had told the robot, must it obey any further commands of his until he was safely inside Diaspar. Those were the orders. If they were obeyed, Alvin had placed his fate beyond the reach of human interference. Never hesitating, the machine raced on along the path he had so carefully mapped out for it. A part of him was still pleading angrily to be released, but he knew now that he was safe. And presently Seranus understood that too, for the forces inside his brain ceased to war with one another. Once more he was at peace, as ages ago an earlier wanderer had been when, lashed to the mast of his ship, he had heard the song of the sirens die away across the wine-dark sea. Chapter 15. Alvin did not relax until the chamber of the moving ways was around him once more. There had still been the danger that the people of Lys might be able to stop or even to reverse the vehicle in which he was traveling and bring him back helplessly to his starting point. But his return was as uneventful as the outward trip. 40 minutes after he left Lys, he was in the tomb of Yarlan Zay. The servants of the council were waiting for him, dressed in the formal black robes which they had not worn for centuries. Alvin felt no surprise and little alarm at the presence of this reception committee. He had now overcome so many obstacles that one more made little difference. He had learned a great deal since leaving Diaspar, and with that knowledge had come a confidence verging upon arrogance. Moreover, he had now a powerful, if erratic, ally. The best minds of Lys had been unable to interfere with his plans. Somehow he believed that Diaspar could do no better. There were rational grounds for this belief, but it was based partly upon something beyond reason, a faith in his destiny which had slowly been growing in Alvin's mind. The mystery of his origin, his success in doing what no earlier man had ever done, the way in which new vistas had opened up before him, all these things added to his self-confidence. Faith in one's own destiny was among the most valuable of the gifts which the gods could bestow upon a man, and Alvin did not know how many it had led to utter disaster. "Alvin," said the leader of the city's proctors, "we have orders to accompany you wherever you go until the council has heard your case and rendered its verdict." With what offense am I charged?" asked Alvin. He was still exhilarated by the excitement and elation of his escape from Lys, and could not yet take this new development very seriously. Presumably Kedron had talked. He felt a brief annoyance at the jester for betraying his secret. "No charge has been made," came the reply. "If necessary, one will be framed after you have been heard." "And when will that be?" "Very soon, I imagine." The proctor was obviously ill at ease and not sure how to handle his unwelcome assignment. At one moment he would treat Alvin as a fellow citizen, and then he would remember his duties as a custodian and would adopt an attitude of exaggerated aloofness. "This robot," he said abruptly, pointing to Alvin's companion, "where did it come from? Is it one of ours?" "No," replied Alvin. "I found it in Lys, in the country I have been to. I have brought it here to meet the central computer." This calm statement produced a considerable commotion. The fact that there was something outside Diaspar was hard enough to accept, but that Alvin should have brought back one of its inhabitants and proposed to introduce it to the brain of the city was even worse. The proctors looked at each other with such helpless alarm that Alvin could hardly refrain from laughing at them. As they walked back through the park, his escort keeping discreetly at the rear and talking among itself in agitated whispers, Alvin considered his next move. The first thing he must do was to discover exactly what had happened during his absence. Kedron, Seranus had told him, had vanished. There were countless places where a man could hide in Diaspar, and since the jester's knowledge of the city was unsurpassed, it was not likely that he would be found until he chose to reappear. Perhaps, thought Alvin, he could leave a message where Kedron would be bound to see it and arrange a rendezvous. However, the presence of his guard might make that impossible. He had to admit that the surveillance was very discreet. By the time he had reached his apartment, he had almost forgotten the existence of the Proctors. He imagined that they would not interfere with his movements unless he attempted to leave Diaspar, and for the time being he had no intention of doing that. Indeed, he was fairly certain that it would be impossible to return to Lys by his original route. By this time, surely, the underground carrier system would have been put out of action by Serranus or her colleagues. The Proctors did not follow him into his room. They knew that there was only the one exit and stationed themselves outside that. Having no instructions regarding the robot, they let it accompany Alvin. It was not a machine which they had any desire to interfere with, since its alien construction was obvious. From its behavior, they could not tell whether it was a passive servant of Alvin's or whether it was operating under its own volition. In view of this uncertainty, they were quite content to leave it entirely alone. Once the wall had sealed itself behind him, Alvin materialized his favorite divan and threw himself down upon it. Luxuriating in his familiar surroundings, he called out of the memory units his last efforts in painting and sculpture and examined them with a critical eye. If they had failed to satisfy him before, they were doubly displeasing now, and he could take no further pride in them. The person who had created them no longer existed. In the few days he had been away from Diaspar, it seemed to Alvin that he had crowded the experience of a lifetime. He canceled all these products of his adolescence, erasing them forever, and not merely returning them to the memory banks. The room was empty again, apart from the couch on which he was reclining, and the robot that still watched him with wide, unfathomable eyes. What did the robot think of Diaspar? Wondered Alvin. Then he remembered that it was no stranger here, for it had known the city in the last days of its contact with the stars. Not until he felt thoroughly at home once more did Alvin begin to call his friends. He began with Ariston and Etania, though out of a sense of duty rather than any real desire to see and speak with them again. He was not sorry when their communicators informed him that they were unavailable, and left them both a brief message announcing his return. This was quite unnecessary, since by now the whole city would know that he was back. However, he hoped that they would appreciate his thoughtfulness. He was beginning to learn consideration, though he had not yet realized that, like most virtues, it had little merit unless it was spontaneous and unself-conscious. Then, acting on a sudden impulse, he called the number that Kedron had given him so long ago in the Tower of Lorraine. He did not, of course, expect an answer, but there was always the possibility that Kedron had left a message. His guess was correct. But the message itself was shatteringly unexpected. The wall dissolved, and Kedron was standing before him. The gesture looked tired and nervous, no longer the confident, slightly cynical person who had set Alvin on the path that led to Lys. There was a haunted look in his eyes, and he spoke as though he had very little time. "Alvin," he began, "this is a recording. Only you can receive it, but you can make what use of it you wish. It does not matter to me. When I got back to the tomb of Jarl Anzay, I found that Alystra had been following us. She must have told the council that you had left Diaspar and that I helped you. Very soon the Proctors were looking for me, and I decided to go into hiding. I'm used to that. I've done it before when some of my jests failed to be appreciated." There, thought Alvin, was a flash of the old Kedron. "They could not have found me in 1,000 years, but someone else nearly did. There are strangers in Diaspar, Alvin. They could only have come from Lys, and they are looking for me. I do not know what this means, and I do not like it. The fact that they nearly caught me, though they are in a city that must be strange to them, suggests they possess telepathic powers. I could fight the council, but this is an unknown peril which I do not care to face. I am therefore anticipating a step which I think the council might well force upon me, since it had been threatened before. I am going where no one can follow, and where I shall escape whatever changes are now about to happen to Diaspar. Perhaps I am foolish to do this. That is something which only time can prove. I shall know the answer one day. By now you will have guessed that I have gone back into the Hall of Creation, into the safety of the memory banks. Whatever happens, I put my trust in the central computer and the forces it controls for the benefit of Diaspar. If anything tampers with the central computer, we are all lost. If not, I have nothing to fear. To me, only a moment will seem to pass before I walk forth into Diaspar again, 50 or 100,000 years from now. I wonder what sort of city I shall find. It will be strange if you are there. Someday, I suppose, we will meet again. I cannot say whether I look forward to that meeting or fear it. I've never understood you, Alvin, though there was a time when I was vain enough to think I did. Only the central computer knows the truth, as it knows the truth about those other uniques who have appeared from time to time down the ages, and then were seen no more. Have you discovered what happened to them? One reason, I suppose, why I am escaping into the future is because I am impatient. I want to see the results of what you have started, but I am anxious to miss the intermediate stages, which I suspect may be unpleasant. It will be interesting to see, in that world which will be around me in only a few minutes of apparent time from now, whether you are remembered as a creator or a destroyer, or whether you are remembered at all. Goodbye, Alvin. I had thought of giving you some advice, but I do not suppose you would take it. You will go your own way as you always have, and your friends will be tools to use or discard as the occasion suits. That is all. I can think of nothing more to say. For a moment, Kedron, the Kedron who no longer existed, save as a pattern of electrical charges in the memory cells of the city, looked at Alvin with resignation and, it seemed, with sadness. And then the screen was blank again. So now, Alvin has lost everyone he knows in Liss, and his best ally in Diaspar, and has only this robot here. Go, Alvin. We'll continue this next time.